Have you ever wondered, if there is no self, then who becomes enlightened? If everything is devoid of self, then what attains liberation? In Christianity, the immortal soul is judged and destined for either heaven or hell. But in Buddhism, there is no self, only the flow of karmic forces. So what leads us to enlightenment? Let's explore the mystery of the self to understand whether we truly exist, or are merely illusions along our spiritual journey. Part 1. The Self in Christianity. The Immortal Soul. Christianity teaches that every person possesses an immortal soul, a sacred gift from God. This soul is unique, eternal, and never vanishes. It carries individual identity and ultimately faces judgment after death. According to Christian doctrine, the journey of the soul concludes in either heaven or hell, depending on one's actions and faith. Enlightenment, from this perspective, is the reunion of the soul with God, purified by His love. Part 2. The Self in Buddhism. No Self, Karma, and the Matana Consciousness. In Buddhism, the notion of a fixed self is called into question. The doctrine of no self, anatta, teaches that what we call the self is merely a combination of impermanent elements. Here, there is no eternal soul. There is only a continuous stream of karmic actions. Enlightenment in Buddhism occurs when we recognize the illusion of the self and free ourselves from attachment to personal identity. Part 3. Matana Consciousness, the root of attachment to the self. But why do we cling so desperately to the notions of I and mine? The answer lies in Matana Consciousness, the deepest layer of mind that holds on to the ego. This layer silently adheres to the alaya vijnana, mistakenly believing it to be an immutable self. It fuels greed, anger, and ignorance, binding individuals to an endless cycle of rebirth. However, through meditation and wisdom, Matana consciousness can transform into equanimity, where we no longer see ourselves as separate entities from the universe. Part 4. So, what achieves enlightenment? Ultimately, what is it that attains enlightenment? In Christianity, the soul is redeemed and reunited with God. In Buddhism, no entity becomes enlightened. Instead, it is the blossoming of wisdom as ignorance is dispelled. Part 5. Harmonizing the two perspectives. Despite their differences, both paths aim to liberate us from suffering and ignorance. Christianity teaches love and humility as means to transcend the self. Buddhism teaches no self and wisdom to let go of attachment. Could these two paths be converging towards a common ultimate truth? Final reflection. If there is no self, who becomes enlightened? Perhaps this is the greatest paradox on the spiritual path. In Christianity, the soul is an immortal entity, saved when it returns to God. In Buddhism, no self attains enlightenment. Rather, it is the brilliance of wisdom that emerges when the illusion of the self dissolves. So, is enlightenment the salvation of a soul? Or is it the liberation from the notion of the self? Perhaps the truth lies not in who is enlightened, but in what disappears along the journey. What do you think? What is your answer? Subscribe to the channel to follow more interesting content.